fly through your inbox and finally make email work for you. It gets rid of spam emails, it deprioritizes emails that aren't as important to you, and it helps you unsubscribe from mailing lists and individual senders with ease. So again, go to www.behindenemylinesradio.us and you click on the SaneBox ad and you'll be given an exclusive offer you won't find anywhere else. Gene Baradelli, back behind enemy lines. We are way past overdue in introducing you to one of our great contributors at www.behindenemylinesradio.us. It's really my fault for kind of hoarding him to myself because he writes such great wonky stuff. And you know what? It's time we should get a little wonky. The last thing we want to do on Thanksgiving is talk politics. So let's get it all out here with our very own contributor, Nat Paul. Nat, how you doing, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great, Gene.
Well, listen, you've been busy. And, listen, first of all, it's great to have you on. We got to get you on more often. But you've been busy with your not-so-brief history of the Electoral College. It's a 3-part series that we did on the website. And again, I'll say it again, www.behindenemylinesradio.us. Can't say that enough on the show. And it really is quite an interesting look and an interesting primer, really, for those who don't know too much about the Electoral College. What made you decide to do this?
Well, I see a lot of people that have strong opinions about the Electoral College without really knowing a whole lot of specifics. I feel like it gets glossed over in school and never revisited for most of us. And so I was hoping that by writing a piece and getting people to read it, maybe they would understand it better and perhaps they change their opinions, perhaps not. But it helps you back them up anyway.
Well, the one thing I like about what you write, and when we say this here on Behind Enemy Lines all the time, we are not fair and balanced. We're not looking to give, just the facts, ma'am. We have definite opinions, and sometimes those definite opinions don't coalesce together. I mean, I've read a lot of what you put out here, and while, I believe it is a good primer, like I said, you have some definite opinions here that I want to talk to you about. So you ready to do this you got your big boy pants on for this or what?
Let's do it.
All right. So I got the sense from reading all 3 of your articles on the website that you're not a fan of the Electoral College as it is. Basically, you understand why it exists, but you don't understand why it hasn't changed with the times. Am I mischaracterizing you, or do you think you could say it better?
It sums up pretty well, I think.
Okay. So now what do you feel currently is wrong with the Electoral College?
I think one problem that we face is that it's not always the most accurate representation of the voters. And I think it also, because of the way it's set up, I think it disenfranchises the voters in a lot of states who stay home because they know that their preferred candidate has no chance of winning that state. Okay, so let's unpack those two. Because I think I half agree with what the 2 things you said. The first thing you said that it's not representative of the voting population. Now, you're talking about the voting population as a whole nationally, or the voting population of that particular state? Because there is, I think you recognize there is a difference between those two, right? Right, and I think it's a bit of both.
Okay, so
we have decided by plurality in most states, or in most states it ends up being a majority, but there were about 10 or 12 this last time where neither candidate had a majority and still got all the votes.
Right, and I think the states where Jill Stein had the margin of victory, because there were more than one candidate available. More than 2 candidates, I should say, available, more than the 2 parties that are normally talked about. And there were third-party candidates like Jill Stein who ended up getting more votes than what the margin of victory was, and thus there was a plurality in those states. But what is wrong with a plurality? It's still, the top person wins, right?
Well, the top person wins, but that might also mean that the most unpopular candidate also wins if that candidate's detractors all voted for separate people.
Right, but what do you do to fix that quagmire, though? Because you could say that about any candidate in that race. You could say that, the top vote getter, quote unquote, didn't win, but neither did anybody else. So why shouldn't it just go to the top vote getter? Why does it have to be that 50+1 in your mind?
It demonstrates better consensus.
And you know what? That may be true.
There's a certain legitimacy to it to have a majority, I think.
You know what? That may be true that it's a demonstration of consensus, but if there is no consensus, even if there's just a plurality, why shouldn't the top vote getter get those electoral votes? If that's the way that, their state has determined their electoral votes will be distributed, why is that a problem when there are multiple candidates that are earning votes? You're never going to get to a 50+1 situation.
Gene, there are definitely ways around that. Like Maine just adopted a ranked choice system where if nobody gets majority consensus, then they start knocking people off the bottom of the ballot and giving those votes to whoever those people voted second for. Like their number 2 preference. There is
something, I know, and you brought that up in part 3, and I gotta say, I don't feel that that's very democratic at all either, because now you're shifting vote counts where someone who was a third-ranked candidate ends up winning. And the person that got the most first-place votes doesn't win. It sounds a lot like, the Cy Young. The Cy Young has first-place votes, second-place votes, and third-place votes. But the one who gets the first-place votes have the majority, those are weighted more than the second-place votes. And those are weighted more than the third-place votes. Why should a third-rate candidate who doesn't get all the first ballot positions in that ranked election be able to win then?
Like this way, there's still definitely flaws to it. It's not neat. It takes a while to count it all up. And it's possible that a lot of people are still going to be pretty unhappy, especially if their guy was in first place. And then the lower choices, I think it just happened actually in Maine. The Republican was winning through the first round of the tally. And then the Democrat was more people's second and third choice and scooted just past.
Right. I mean, absolutely. That happens.
Sucks to have your guy winning and then not. Usually come from behind victories are more fun in baseball than in politics, for sure.
Oh, no, I absolutely. Yep. But now we're talking about the presidency.
Well, for the presidency, it's a similar deal. It's definitely not fun to have your presidential candidate winning and then not. But when we're so divided that there's not a clear consensus, it seems more fair to either proportionately divvy out the electoral votes or to go ahead and use like a ranked choice system or something like that to make sure that everyone's voice is actually heard.
Well,
I think that this could lead to actually a higher rate of voter participation.
Well, I think what 2018 has taught us, though, at least in my opinion, and Nat, I totally respect your opinion on this, and I get what you're saying. I feel like what gets people out to vote is a reason to go out to vote. And if people start seeing, in let's say in Maine, in a ranked voting system, that the number one choice, the person who got the number one choice overall isn't winning, then that disenfranchises just as much. Again, one man's opinion. And to me, it feels like the Electoral College system, getting kind of back to the topic, the Electoral College system to me feels like the balance of federalism. You have popular voice, and you have substantive weight of population by state as broken down by congressional district. Now, one point I'll give you credit for that you brought up in your articles is that some congressional districts are not as equal as others. Why don't you give the example that you gave in part 3 about Wyoming?
I can point out that Wyoming has a whopping total of, I forget how many people.
Somewhere around, the population of, it was about 200,000 in the congressional district. Not exactly the most populous state in the union.
Right.
And yet...
And so
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so their voice proportionally far outweighs their population. Whereas you look at a large state like Texas or California, they have many more people per electoral vote. And so their votes don't count equally.
Right, so for instance...
And I understand definitely wanting to weight things a bit so that the tiny states aren't completely just lost in the sauce, because that wouldn't be entirely fair to them. But considering the fact that most of those small states, really the smallest and the largest states, are usually not all that competitive, it means that there is a large group of people that's just ignored right out the gates. Right, how many New York voters voted for Donald Trump in 2016?
I hear you. Quite a few did, but how many of those same New Yorkers voted for Mark Molinaro for governor? I mean, if you want to say 59 out of the 60, if you want to say 57 out of the 62 counties voted for Mark Molinaro, then that doesn't really add up to a hill of beans. But once you say that 5 counties controls who becomes governor of the People's Republic of New York, that sounds a little disproportionate to some. So I think you can, do you recognize that could be seen both ways at least?
Well, it definitely can.
Okay.
I mean, when you look at a map by county of the country, and it's after the 2016 election, it was like 90% red. But the map shows land, and the people don't live evenly distributed across the land. And so they're competing values that definitely both have value to them.
Right.
But you can't have all of one without giving the other the shaft.
Which is representative of what you originally talked about in the first piece that you wrote at www.behindtheallianceradio.us, which is that the Electoral College is a compromise between larger population states and smaller population states that was struck back at the founding of the country. But you kind of feel like that has now, the time for that has now passed, right?
I think it has, for several reasons.
All right,
the first being that education is so much more ubiquitous now than it was at the time of the founding. The founders were almost all highly educated lawyers and thinkers, and the average education back then was only like 6th grade amongst other people.
Okay,
and now
that was a limitation.
Everyone goes through high school. Most people get some kind of education beyond that. A lot of people get college degrees, and so they're better equipped to vote in their own interest without having someone do it for them. Because we have to remember, too, that when the Electoral College was instituted, they didn't even necessarily call for a popular vote at all. I mean, about half the states used the state legislature to just appoint electors to vote based on whatever they wanted.
Right, and because back then, even back then, the state legislators elected senators as well, and that's just
right.
that was the framework. With regards to education, to me, I don't really, and this is going to sound kind of cruel, and feel free to call me out on it if you want. I don't think that a voter's education should have anything to do with how they vote. There are people out there that go out and vote not because they're educated, but because they are, accustomed to doing so for a certain line. I call it the zombie vote. They go out there and they choose, the laundry, the Republican laundry, the Democrat laundry, whatever the case may be. Their vote is no less valid for that reason, though, because that's how they chose to do it. So while education is definitely more accessible to the masses, certainly much more than it was, 200 years ago, do you think that means that the system should change to reflect the increase in average education for the voter? What did the founders think, that people were just stupid?
They may have. I don't recall actually reading that explicitly stated in any of their writings. Not that I've read anyway,
but there's a distrust there.
I mean, a voter is only as good as the information he has upon which to base his vote. And so between the education factor back then being almost non-existent, and also the difficulty in disseminating information quickly. I mean, the telegraph wasn't going to be invented for decades after the country was, which meant news could only travel as fast as somebody on horseback. And so for all of the voters in all the far-flung corners of the country, there might be some crucial piece of information like, Aaron Burr turns out to be a traitor, that would definitely have implications for your vote, but wouldn't be available until it was much too late.
An argument that lasts to this day against early voting, I might add. Something may happen later on that, after your vote is cast, that may have changed your mind.
Absolutely.
All right, well, listen, I'm definitely digging the point, and I understand all that. The last thing I want to talk to you about, we're gonna make this the big segment on the show here. I really enjoy getting down into this wonky stuff,